What's up, family? I want to do this quick video on the connection between Christianity and superstition. I've posted several videos on superstition where in most I go through great lengths not to mention any specific religion, preferring to focus on the root of superstition instead, which I definitely find to be more effective in getting down to the actual point. I like to be clear in all of my communications. One of my favorite communicators was Malcolm X, also known as Malcolm Little. You know, bunch of names there. But Malcolm had this concept of making it plain. Whenever you talk, do your best to make it plain. And so that's something that I like to try to do here. And so, and of course, I do this for a few reasons. Number one, to create a safe space for those who are culturally religious, to explore the correlation with their own beliefs and superstitions. Because it is true that if most people, or that if a large segment of people are introduced to the idea that their beliefs may be superstition, many of them would be all the more willing to question those beliefs and to actually do some proper deconstruction there. But then the second reason I do this is to highlight the possibility of leaving religion while still clinging to superstition. And I do that work more so for the atheist community than anything else, to make that clear that religion is only a part of the problem, and it's a part of the problem that we made a part of the problem, in the same way that politics are still a part of the problem. Even the way that we approach education, particularly in this country, is still a problem, right? But I've noticed that even in these videos where I do go through great pains not to single out Christian belief or practice, Christians tend to respond ferociously. I'd encourage you to go check out my comments just to test it out for yourself and see what I'm talking about. And of course, I find this to be incredibly revealing as a phenomenon, because you would think that a monotheistic religion in which one claims to only have one God who shares his essence with at least two others, and sometimes with everybody, because God likes to get around. But you would think if you had a belief where you held on to this monotheistic ascription, that you would do your best to separate your beliefs from superstitions as much as possible. As a matter of fact, you would think when people are talking about superstition that they're not talking about you. As a matter of fact, when I was a Christian, that's how I felt. I felt when people were talking about superstitions, they were always talking about other groups of people, not me, because according to my understanding, my belief system wasn't superstitious. I remember the day that I realized that, holy snap, this there may be certain aspects of this belief that are superstitious. I was with an evangelical group. That's actually not the way to say that. I was with an outreach group, evangelistic group. I was with an outreach group. We were doing outreach in some housing projects, and it started to rain lightly. When it started to rain, we decided to get together in a prayer circle and pray that the rain would stop. And when we did that, I remembered thinking back over several sermons that I had heard that were indicating that Native Americans were superstitious, or certain groups of Native Americans were superstitious for doing such things as rain dances. And so here we are doing a rain chant, which is essentially what a prayer is, expecting the same outcome. So I then realized that, holy snap, there are major aspects of my belief system that are not separated from superstition. Obviously, things like that can tend to become a somewhat of a slippery slope. So, but it turns out that Christians are likely the most superstitious of all the other religious groups due to synchronization strategies. As a matter of fact, it turns out you'd be hard pressed not to find common superstitions in the United States that don't have their roots in Christianity or cultural Christian practices. So, for example, in this particular video, I wanted to share or just talk through a list of superstitious characters that are mostly and in many cases only supported by Christians. Interesting phenomenon, right? And again, the reason I'm doing this because I've had several videos that I only mention superstition and I talk about how superstition is bad for critical thinking and things of these natures. And in every video that I do like this, it never fails. Christians jump on there. And some of them are, and I just have to say this the nicest way I can, are ignorant enough to be like, hey, you should stop talking about superstition. God doesn't like that. Aha. Aha. But that's the same thing. Like if you're talking about superstition and a Christian gets upset, then they already know that their belief has a high correlation to superstition. Otherwise, they would be like I was and just be like, that's right, superstition is bad. But in this day and age, we have Christians who absolutely know, understand, and do not deny that their entire relationship with the Bible, with the world around them, with God, and even with Jesus, the lover of their soul, is solely based on superstition and therefore misunderstanding. So let's kind of jump through some of these characters. All right. The first one should be obvious, and I've actually experimented with this myself. For those of you who've kind of heard my story a little bit, before we told anybody that we were atheist, agnostic, unbelievers, or anything like that, we simply stopped celebrating Christmas in our house. Which I remind people, it was an economic decision, not a religious decision, and it was also a social decision. I decided that I did not like the consumerism of Christmas, nor did I like the entitlement that it kind of gave kids, in a sense that specifically those who taught their children Santa's getting this for you, as opposed to I worked extra hours to be able to afford to get this for you. And then you're actually having the child to thank Santa for their Christmas presents instead of thanking you. And then when they're older in age, you're trying to figure out why they don't appreciate the sacrifices you've made for them. And that's because you separated them from the opportunity to appreciate those sacrifices. Also, I come from a community where there is a large wealth gap in between us and other cultures and races. And my community possibly participates in Christmas more than anybody else's, which of course we have that right to. I'm not telling anybody don't participate in Christmas. However, I would advise if you are financially struggling, financially behind, economically behind, I would tell you to choose your child's future over their presents. Yes. So that's what we did. And when we did that, we had no religious attachment to that decision at all. But almost all of the religious people in our lives begin to attack us very hard. And that's actually not that strange. It was something that we knew was coming because one of the biggest problems that my black families, both sides, mother side and father side, had with Jehovah's Witnesses was that they didn't celebrate Christmas. Why? Because Christians have this strong attachment to superstition. And they understand that if you start pulling one superstition down, eventually you're going to pull away at the whole fabric of their belief system. So let's go through some of these characters. The first one is rather obvious, isn't it? Santa Claus. You'd be surprised to know that out of all the people who believe, and we use the word believe here loosely, because we do know that many people who support the Santa Claus mythology do not actually believe in Santa Claus. But we also know that many of the people who support the Christian mythology don't actually believe in a hell. Otherwise, they behave differently. And I'd also like to remind people that over 90% of the prison population were believers prior to going into prison. So Christian, Christianity or religion for that matter does nothing to make you a better person, make you a moral person, or anything of that nature. As a matter of fact, it may produce more criminals. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about the idea that that the majority of our criminals in the U.S. are also believers. That's also just a statistical norm, but also the fact that many of the laws in the U.S. are laws that are superstitiously motivated, religiously motivated, and therefore people literally get arrested for simply not practicing other people's beliefs, even though it's not communicated that way. That's precisely what's happening. So we got Santa Claus, and if you got Santa Claus, guess what? You also have Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And if you have Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you probably have some elves. And so all of these superstitious characters are celebrated and acknowledged in most Christian households from the time their children are 0 up until the time they're 12. And some go quite beyond that, almost like breastfeeding. Just you're just staying on it a little too long. Um, but then not only those, we don't stop there. We don't stop with Santa. There's also the Easter Bunny. Then there is Groundhog from Groundhog's Day because he predicts the weather. And then there's Father Time. Almost any time I've heard the concept of Father Time, it's been coming from people with Christian attachments. Mother Earth, the same way, which is why so many people who do deconstruct from Christianity, many of them become worshipers of nature for a while because that superstition was already naturally a part of their culturally Christian experience, especially here in the U.S. Oh, the devil. Don't forget about that. If you believe in God, if you believe in Christ, for some strange reason, you also have to believe in this ultimate enemy who actually works for God. But he's a devil and he's not by himself. He actually has demons too. So let's add some more to our superstitious football team here. It's like a fantasy ball league, right? And of course, if you have demons, you have angels. Gotta have some angels. And then, of course, it's a high amount of Christians that actually believe in ghosts. Actually, the majority of people, especially in the US, who believe in ghosts or seeing their dead relatives are people who have an attachment to Christian theology. Very interesting, right? Leprechauns. Yes, Christians believe in leprechauns. And again, we're using the word believe loosely here, but what I want to demonstrate is just how close this attachment to Christianity is to superstition. And number one, we've already seen this demonstration in my comments to when I'm doing a video that's solely about superstitions, Christians immediately get offended. So leprechauns, St. Patrick's Day, the end of the rainbow, four-leaf clovers. If you went through school in the U.S. public school, you've had interactions with all of these. And witches. I do find it interesting that Christians tend to believe in witches and have been believing in witches for a very long time. Even in the Old Testament, it seemed that the people who were associated with Yahweh also believed in witches, which is why they were so damn strong about killing them, right? And that thing lasted for quite a while because it seems that we just stopped killing witches about 300 years ago. Um, Yep. So yes, Christians have a superstitious attachment to witches, vampires, zombies, and all other types of things. Bloody Mary. Yeah, y'all remember Bloody Mary? Look in the mirror, say her name a few times, something might happen. This particular joke, 99% of the households who participated in this, and I'm being facetious with that statistic, but were Christian households or households that would at least be identified as culturally Christian. And then perhaps the biggest superstitious character that seems to be promoted by majority Christians. Hope you're ready for this one. And let me preface this by saying the whole point of highlighting this is demonstrating that Christians have a strong attachment to superstition, and I don't think that they can actually delineate between the superstitions of their life and the superstitions of their belief system. So, are you ready for this last character? The last superstitious character who seems to be majorly promoted and supported by Christians is the one and only Donald Trump. Yes, 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 I did that. I did that. There you go. To be sure, to be sure, one must first be superstitious in order to then be Christian or any other religious system, especially one that requires the acceptance of information without reason or evidence. Nobody becomes a Christian without being introduced and inculcated to superstition first. That's my little quick chat for today. Thank you for spending time with me. I'll talk to you later. Keep rising, stay progressive, stay beautiful.